poets and writers, I'm Kay Spivey, and today's video is maybe a little bit different. Like, I don't do these on my channel that much. Kind of a teaching video. This is a collab with a very talented Scylla Grand, whose collection Scarlet Shadows I definitely talked about before on this channel. They're really talented with rhyme, and I'm going to be also doing a collab on that subject as well. But Scylla had recommended that I do a video about scansion and syllables, which then I was like, oh, because to be perfectly honest, this is my least favorite part about poetry. When you're learning poetry, you have to learn these things, but it's like when they're teaching you sentence structure in schools. It's exactly the same thing as when they're teaching you sentence structures in schools and you have to like map out the sentence, like this is the verb, this is the noun. Like, that was my least favorite part. Completely, that was murder to me. I hated all of that. It's the exact same thing to do scansion and syllables, but it's kind of like riding a bicycle. Like, if you just walked up to the machine and had no idea how it worked, like, maybe you could figure it out. It's possible. But also, it definitely helps if someone is like, here's how you sit on it, and the pedaling is what's going to make it go, and here's how you pedal. Like, if someone teaches you the steps, it does make it a lot easier to understand how the machine works, right? And that's the exact same thing with poetry. Like, and with sentence structure. The reason that we learn how to break it down in the most tedious, monotonous, horrible ways ever in high school is because learning the mechanics of the sentence allows you to work the machine, allows you to operate writing. So it is important. Scansion is vital to understanding poetry. Even though it's not my favorite and I'm not necessarily qualified as a teacher, it is super important, and Scylla's right, we should talk about it. I'm going to be linking all of Scylla's contact information, their website, and also it'll be right at the top, the first thing you see when you go down, to Scylla's Medium account, where they have done a breakdown of scansion and syllables. That's fantastic. You definitely need to go and check that out, and be sure to support them as well and pick up their lovely collection. Actually, I'll put the collection over here. I'll put it next to mine. We'll put it right there. Okay, start off, what does scansion even mean? Let's ask good old Google what the definition of scansion is, and it's the action of scanning a line of verse to determine its rhythm. Rhythm in poetry is very, very important. It can either be very, very strict, or it can follow the way that we speak naturally. And it can do both things as well. There's a reason that iambic pentameter was what Shakespeare used for his plays, and that is because that kind of cadence sounds very similar to a natural speech pattern. I learned a lot of poetry from this collection, which I know I've brought up before. Stephen Fry really went out of his way to make a very accessible but semi-thick poetry how-to guide, the Ode Less Traveled. It's really easy to follow, but also very, very informative. When I finally felt like I understood things was when I did all of the worksheets in this book and read the whole thing. So I'll be referring back to that as well as to Scylla's blog, and let's talk about why you use scansion, how you use scansion, and also syllables. Syllables are actually pretty easy. We can also turn to Google to find out what syllables are. For the most part, you probably know, and I know that they are my weak point. So a syllable is a unit of sound. Syllables are the number of beats in a word. So a word, I know, field is my contentious one. We'll just skip past that one, but something like apple. There are 2 beats to the word apple, and so it has 2 syllables. They're the beats in a word. Nice and easy. You use those beats to scan a line to figure out what its meter is. Meter is the pattern of beats in the line. And when we talk about scansion, what we're talking about is the pattern and the stress of the beats in the line. The da-dum, 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 or dum-dee, dum-dee, dum-dee. In Stephen Fry's book, he says, each English word is given its own weight or push as we speak within a sentence. And then his example is, each English word, this is gonna be so hard, each English word is given its own weight and push as we speak it within a sentence. That's a little bit extreme, and also he is British, but he acknowledges that. The British and the Americans have very different ways of emphasizing words, and actually most accents have different ways of emphasizing words. There's not like a strict way of doing this. Scylla also points that out. the way in which you emphasize words within a sentence is actually, it's a lot more important within spoken word poetry, but you can learn how to read it as well within the context of the lines that are given to you. A person's accent will impact the way that they emphasize words. Their language from birth will impact their emphasis. And so it's not like this cut and dry thing. It's not like this is the only, iambic pentameter is the only way to read this. There are so many different ways to emphasize a line, like trochee, I am, spondy, which are all fancy terms for the way in which we emphasize the words. And this is something that like could be an entire like course. This is an entire course. This is an entire book, you guys. This is like 100 pages of this book is going in depth into what meter is, how you use it, why you use it. And there's kind of two different ways that we do use it. And that's the natural way of speaking versus adding emphasis. Now, the way a word is naturally said within a conversation, there are certain words that we just say certain ways. Like the example Mr. Fry gives is we say British, we don't say British. And we say machine, we don't say machine, or even machine. It's hard to say. It's hard to say it with like with a spondy. There's just certain words that naturally we give certain weights to the parts of the word. Machine is a really good one. You don't say machine. Changing the emphasis can have sometimes a comedic effect. The IT crowd, there's a character in it, it's been so long since I've seen it, but I can't get over, he used to call it a Kit Kat instead of a Kit Kat, a Kit Kat. And I was like, it's so funny when you change up the emphasis. It can also create a lot of impact. It also can, and in poetry, this is the key. This is something that you would do in rap, you do in music quite commonly, very commonly in fact. If you're writing music, this is probably like being able to switch up how you're using stresses is like the key. This is how you create music. You need to know how to mix up the stresses in a way that still sounds like you're saying actual words, like you're not talking like to be silly. It doesn't sound silly, but it still sounds like the rhymes fit together and that the stresses all fit together in a way that's really nice. Like if every other word in a sentence is being said, let's just keep using I ams. So da 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 da. If you have a word in there that goes da da, it could be that that trips up the line. But if you were to say that word also as da da, it would then fit within the line. However, what if that word needs to be emphasized very, very strongly? Changing it to dada will make it stand out extremely. Like anything you do that's different will cause something to stand out, and that can be in a good or a bad way, and you gotta choose which one it is. That tripping up of the stresses is something that then will emphasize the way you read a poem quite a bit. If the natural way of reading lines gets you into a natural pattern, and this is kind of vital if you're going to use rhyme, just BT dubs. In free verse, you have a little bit more leeway of just sticking, and the more you stick to the natural speech pattern, the better in free verse. But if you are using a rhyme schemed structure, wow, my stomach just made the loudest growl. Could you hear that? Oh my God. If you're using a rhyme scheme structure, you really need to pay attention to where the bounce of the line is, where the emphasis is on the words in the line, because that will impact the rhyme dramatically. If everything else has been going like da 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 da, and you have like a 3-syllable word, Scylla uses the word troublesome. So troublesome, it tends to be hard on trouble and then break down. But if everything else has been da 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 da, you would naturally then want to read it as troublesome because it would fit with that flow. If you happened though to stick it so it would be troublesome, it might seem a little bit weird because we don't tend to emphasize the bull in troublesome. We tend to emphasize troublesome. Troublesome kids. Troublesome kids could also fit, but again, it will depend upon the words used around it. And the words around the words, the words around the words are very important, you guys. Oh, this is so hard to talk about though. When you're getting into Scansion, when you're scanning a line, if you're doing it for school, there's a very rigid structure and do I have an example in here? I have so many little marked up places, but I did it in pencil, so it's not easy to see. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. Oh, there we go. I got it showing up. Do you see how it's marked? So the accents are marked. So then the flat line denotes the kind of neutral, and the accent is where it goes up. So in that case, they're doing I am. In this exercise, I've also separated the feet. And so one I am is 1 foot. One combination of stresses is 1 foot. Within this exercise, and he gives the first example, it's probably easier to see his example here. 1 foot, and he's marked it with a line. I am, I am, I am, I am, I am. And it can get a lot more complicated. But that's basically, in school, that's how you would do it. You would set up to measure the feet and to measure the stresses. And that's scanning poetry. That's Scansion. That's how you read a poem. That's how you figure out what the emphases are and how to then verbally say the poem. If you're just doing it for yourself, you don't have to be as strict about it. The way you decide to say it will also impact the meaning in some ways. And so like I said earlier, the main reason that you do this, that you learn like this is a foot and this is what it sounds like, is so that you notice those differences. Because if with all of those I ams, suddenly a trochee is thrown in, it's going to sound different. It's going to mix things up. But also, if all of your sentences have been, if all of the lines have been under 1 meter, and then suddenly you're changing it up, and you're not sure why maybe this line or this word or something isn't working in your own poetry, if you're unsure of why it sounds kind of weird, and when you're reading it out loud, you kind of trip over it, or it just isn't getting the right emphasis across, it is probably because you've messed up your meter somewhere and your emphasis then has switched in some way that is counterproductive to what the rest of the poem is doing. A good reason to be able to recognize where the stresses are and where the syllable counts are and what a foot is and what your meter is, a good reason to recognize those things is because a lot of times that's what's tripping up your poetry. Like if your words are on point and your meaning is on point, like you know where you're going with this and you feel like you have like the strongest combination of words and phrases together, but something's not working, you need to go down even smaller. You need to go down into those line levels and down into what is going wrong within the meter. And this is totally true for free verse as well. If you've set up a guideline of rules for the way your poem is read by virtue of all the other words that you've stuck into the poem, where that formula is no longer true is going to play against everything. And it could be for a good reason, but if something's not working right in there, it is probably that. And probably one of the best, easiest, smartest ways to fix your poem is to look at that line level and fix that meter. And that could be all the line needs, is to simply fit in with the emphasis of the rest of the poem. And that's really why we use it. That's why learning how to ride a bike first and then riding a bike means less falling and less just being totally stumped. Less having to throw away a poem because something's just not working and you can't figure it out, and more being able to dive into the specific thing that isn't working and being able to figure that out. And also, if you're reading a poem by someone else and it just doesn't feel like it's working for you, something could be wrong within the meter. Something could be not working within that. And people who are quite masterful at poetry, you won't even notice it. It won't feel ba-dun-da-dun-da-dun, even though it could easily be read that way. It will feel very natural if it's done very well. And that's kind of the point. The point is to hide that within the lines in such a way that it reads very smoothly. But also, you can then play with it. Once you understand it, you can play with it and add emphasis elsewhere. And that is something that music does very, very well, as we mentioned earlier. Scylla gave an example of a Katy Perry song in which she changed the word rhythm into rhythm in order to make it flow better within the line. And in spoken word poetry, you have all the freedom to do the same kind of thing, to change up the actual flow of the words, the actual like beats and meters of the words in order to make it sound different, in order to have the different emphasis. When you're just reading the poem on the page, understanding that because there's been a certain beat, you probably read a word like rhythm. If everything else has been in an I-am, that word is also probably in an I-am, and reading it as rhythm will help you to get the flow of the poem better than continuing to read it as rhythm, which is how you would normally say it. Does this all make sense? Am I just rambling? Do you have any questions? Like, have I actually explained what scansion is? Scansion, again, is being able to read a line of poetry and understand where the beats and the rhythm are. It's not even like having training wheels for your bike, it's like understanding the mechanics of how a bike works. It's understanding you have to get onto the bicycle seat and then pedal the wheels in order to keep yourself upright. Like, it's that basic to poetry, but it's something that is so annoying in school, but you have to do it and fall down and scrape your knee a couple times in order to then be able to read a poem in a smooth manner and also in the way that it was intended. Because this isn't something that is just kind of arbitrary, or that people are sitting down and just like absolutely like, oh my gosh, I gotta get every single syllable as I'm writing it perfectly on beat. Like, definitely some people are. It's something that naturally comes as you get more and more used to poetry and the way that it moves and bounces. Like, there is a certain aspect of the lyricism of poetry that it's very important to understand, like, why it works so well to take this down and put it on paper. An art form that is so much better accompanied by music. Like, saying words in a beautiful way is so beautifully accompanied by music. Like, why is it still powerful to do the same thing flat on a page? And how do we accomplish that? And one of the ways we accomplish that is through meter, is through simply taking the way the word is said and setting it up in the same way that you would set up actual beats if you were doing a melody. It is important to know, and I don't know that I did the best job, but I'm gonna link you down below to Scylla's explanation of scansion and syllable stress, and we're also going to talk about rhythm and rhyme. Got me working hard now. But that'll be a video for another day. Again, please check out all of Scylla's socials down below. Please leave any questions or comments or better explanations, honestly, because teaching is not necessarily my strong point, but there is a reason that we learn these things. And again, if you really want to get into craft, I just can't recommend the Ode Less Traveled enough. It is just, don't look at my tags. It is just so accessible and has all of the worksheets, has all of the, I mean, he should sponsor me at this point, right? Because I just keep bringing it up. But honestly, it's just the most accessible way to get into learning the form of poetry, the art form. Like, if you were to get into painting and you started taking just a sketching class just to start from the very basics, same kind of thing. Like, you have to build up your knowledge in order to be able to do all of the things that an art form is capable of. And the more that you learn, the better. It's a great way to get started. But hopefully this was also somewhat helpful, and at least kind of pointed you in a good direction and explained a few things. Leave your comments down below, and I will talk to you again very soon. Good luck to you. Good luck to all of us. Bye.